The German High Command, steeped in the swift victories of the Blitzkrieg, held a profound disdain for the British Expeditionary Force. Their intelligence reports, filtered through a lens of racial and military superiority, painted a picture of an island nation ill-prepared, its soldiers soft, its spirit broken. They mocked the Tommies as a spent force, a relic of a bygone empire. But a select few officers, tasked with assessing the enemy's true strength, were about to witness a reality that would shatter their carefully constructed illusions, revealing a colossal, unyielding force they had catastrophically underestimated. Autumn 1940 clung to the air, a crisp, damp chill permeating the concrete bunkers of the German Atlantic Wall. Oberleutnant Klaus Richter, a man whose sharp features and even sharper intellect had propelled him through the ranks of the Wehrmacht, surveyed the choppy grey expanse of the English Channel from a coastal battery near Calais. His family, Prussian landowners for generations, had instilled in him a deep sense of duty and an unshakable belief in German destiny. Beside him, Hauptmann Erich Brandt, a burly veteran of the Polish and French campaigns, his uniform smelling faintly of stale tobacco and gun oil, puffed on a cigarette, its acrid smoke mingling with the salty tang of the sea. The rhythmic crash of waves against the shore was a constant, monotonous backdrop to their vigil, a sound that seemed to mock the distant, unseen enemy. "Another day, another futile British patrol," Brandt sneered, gesturing towards a distant smudge on the horizon. A Royal Navy destroyer, barely visible through the morning mist. "They cling to their island like frightened mice while we prepare the final blow. Their navy is a relic, their army a joke, their air force a nuisance." Richter nodded, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. He had meticulously studied the intelligence reports, scrutinized the aerial reconnaissance photographs, and absorbed every word of the Führer's pronouncements. Britain was isolated, its industrial heartland vulnerable, its army, what remained of it after the ignominious retreat from Dunkirk, a ragtag collection of reservists, elderly Home Guard volunteers, and green recruits. The pervasive propaganda machine had done its work with chilling efficiency, and the officers, from the highest echelons of the Wehrmacht to the frontline observers, believed it implicitly, their minds saturated with images of British weakness. Their mess halls, often smelling of stale beer, sauerkraut and cheap tobacco, buzzed with dismissive chatter that echoed the official line. The British were plucky, yes, a grudging concession often delivered with a sneer, but ultimately weak. Their vast empire was crumbling, their national resolve brittle, their fighting spirit diminished by decades of peace and perceived decadence. Richter recalled a recent briefing in a dimly lit, smoke-filled room where a senior general, General Feldmarschall von Rundstedt himself, had openly ridiculed British training methods, comparing them unfavorably to the rigorous, disciplined German system. "They play at war, gentlemen," the general had boomed, his voice echoing with contempt, "while we wage it with scientific precision, unyielding will, and superior Aryan strength." The sentiment was pervasive, a deep-seated conviction that bordered on dogma, reinforced by every victory. The British soldier, the Tommy, was seen as an amateur, a gentleman adventurer more suited to colonial skirmishes in distant lands than modern mechanized warfare on the European continent. Brandt, ever the raconteur, often recounted embellished tales from the French campaign of 1940, describing British soldiers retreating in disarray, abandoning their precious equipment, their faces etched with panic and confusion. These anecdotes, amplified with each retelling, solidified the narrative of British incompetence and cowardice, painting a picture of a nation on the verge of collapse. The air in their quarters, heavy with the scent of leather, gun oil, and the metallic tang of impending conflict, was thick with this certainty, this unshakable belief in their own racial and military superiority. The distant thud of artillery practice from their own batteries, a rhythmic pulse against the biting wind, only reinforced their sense of impending, inevitable victory. The temperature, a raw 8 degrees Celsius, seemed to mirror the cold, calculating efficiency they believed defined their war machine, a machine designed to crush all opposition. Richter, despite his intellectual leanings and a background in military strategy from the prestigious Kriegsakademie, found himself largely in agreement. He had devoured Clausewitz and Moltke, and the British Empire, while historically significant, seemed to him a bloated, overextended entity, ripe for collapse under the weight of its own contradictions and the relentless pressure of the Reich. He envisioned a swift, decisive invasion, a landing on the southern coast, perhaps near Dover or Brighton, and then a rapid, unstoppable advance on London, the heart of their decadent empire. The British would fold, just as the French had, their famed stiff upper lip proving no match for the Blitzkrieg's overwhelming force. Their island mentality, their stubborn, almost childish refusal to acknowledge their manifest inferiority, would be their ultimate undoing. He pictured the bewildered, defeated faces of British civilians, the swift, unconditional surrender of their remaining forces, a mere formality. It was a foregone conclusion, a mere matter of timing and logistics, a final act in the drama of European domination. The only real question was when the Führer would give the order for Operation Celian, the invasion that would seal Britain's fate. Brandt, less intellectual but equally convinced, often spoke of the softness of the British, their perceived lack of true martial spirit, their over-reliance on naval power, and their glaring absence of a truly formidable modern land army. "They have no stomach for a real fight, Klaus," he'd often declare, clinking his beer stein with a triumphant grin. "They'll break the moment our boots hit their beaches, mark my words. Their spirit is weak, their resolve shattered." This unwavering confidence, born of early spectacular victories and a carefully curated narrative of invincibility, was a powerful, intoxicating brew. It blinded them to any alternative reality, any possibility that their assessment might be fundamentally, catastrophically flawed. The strategic situation, with Britain isolated, its continental allies vanquished and seemingly on the ropes, only reinforced this dangerous complacency. They were poised for victory, or so they believed, utterly oblivious to the colossal hidden strength that lay just across the narrow stretch of water, a strength forged in adversity, a strength they would soon be forced to confront in a manner that would shake their very foundations. Their certainty was a fortress, but one built on sand, soon to be eroded by the relentless tide of an unforeseen, brutal truth, a truth that would expose the hollowness of their contempt. The circumstances that would begin to unravel this carefully constructed German certainty arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet hum of a reconnaissance aircraft and the subtle machinations of wartime diplomacy. In late 1941, as the war in the East intensified, the German High Command, ever pragmatic despite its ideological blind spots, sought to understand the true extent of British industrial capacity and manpower, particularly in light of increasing American aid. Richter and Brandt, now attached to a specialized intelligence unit known for its discreet operations, found themselves on a clandestine mission. Their objective? To gather photographic and human intelligence on British military installations and training camps, specifically those in the Midlands and the Southeast, areas previously deemed less critical than the heavily fortified coastal defences. Disguised as neutral observers from a fictitious Swedish humanitarian organisation, their cover story elaborate and meticulously crafted, they were granted limited, supervised access to certain areas, ostensibly to assess damage from German bombing raids and report on civilian welfare. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, coal smoke, and the faint unfamiliar scent of British tea as their commandeered civilian car, a rather battered Austin, navigated the winding hedgerow-lined roads of rural England. The constant drizzle, a persistent British companion, seemed to mirror the growing unease in Richter's gut, a premonition of something profoundly unsettling. Their first stop was a sprawling Royal Air Force airfield near Coventry, a city already scarred by the Luftwaffe's brutal attentions. What they expected was a functional but modest facility, perhaps still reeling from the Blitz. What they saw was a colossal complex, far larger and more active than any single German airfield they knew. Hangar after hangar, each a cavernous structure of corrugated iron and steel, stretched into the distance, each one teeming with activity. The deafening roar of Merlin engines being tested, a powerful guttural sound, was a constant symphony of raw power and readiness. Mechanics, their faces smudged with grease and their hands calloused, swarmed over Spitfires and Hurricanes, their movements precise, efficient, and utterly dedicated. The sheer number of aircraft, not just operational, but under repair, assembly, or awaiting deployment, was staggering, a testament to an industrial output they had dismissed as impossible. Brandt, usually so boisterous and quick with a jibe, fell silent, his jaw slack, his eyes wide with a dawning comprehension. "This is unexpected, Klaus," he muttered, his voice barely audible above the din, a tremor of doubt in his tone. The scale was immense, the organization meticulous, almost Germanic in its efficiency. They observed hundreds of young men, barely out of their teens, marching with a disciplined precision that belied their youth, their uniforms crisp, their rifles gleaming. These were not the green recruits of their propaganda. These were soldiers being forged in the crucible of war with an intensity they had not anticipated. The smell of aviation fuel, freshly turned earth, and the faint aroma of frying bacon from a distant mess hall filled the air, a stark contrast to the stale metallic air of their bunkers. Later that week, their journey took them further south, towards a vast training area on Salisbury Plain, a bleak, windswept expanse of chalk downland. The sheer scale of the landscape, dotted with temporary barracks, firing ranges and obstacle courses, was overwhelming. Here, the sheer numbers were even more pronounced. Thousands upon thousands of men, a seemingly endless tide of khaki, moved across the undulating terrain. They witnessed mock battles, artillery drills, and infantry maneuvers on a scale that dwarfed anything they had imagined possible for a nation they considered exhausted. The ground vibrated with the thunder of explosions, the incessant crackle of small arms fire, the guttural shouts of sergeants, their voices hoarse from exertion. The air was cold, damp, and carried the metallic scent of cordite and the earthy smell of churned mud. These were not the demoralized remnants of Dunkirk, nor the effete gentlemen of their caricatures. These were men, hardened by purpose, their faces grim but undeniably determined, their movements purposeful. Richter felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach, a chilling premonition. The propaganda had spoken of a nation on its knees, its spirit broken, but what he saw was a nation on its feet, preparing to fight with a ferocity they had utterly misjudged. The sheer volume of men, the relentless systematic training, the logistical precision required to sustain such an operation, it was a testament to a national effort they had completely underestimated. Brandt, usually quick with a dismissive remark, remained uncharacteristically quiet, his gaze fixed on the endless columns of marching men, his earlier bravado replaced by a palpable unease. The sight of so many British men, not just soldiers, but also engineers, logistics personnel and support staff, all working with a quiet, grim efficiency, began to chip away at their ingrained prejudices, revealing the hollowness beneath. The scale was simply too vast to ignore, too organized to dismiss as mere bluster. The cold, hard reality was beginning to dawn, a reality far more formidable than their carefully constructed illusions. The wind whipped around them, carrying the sounds of a nation preparing for total war, a sound that was both chilling and undeniably powerful, a stark contradiction to everything they had been taught to believe. The true turning point, the moment their illusions irrevocably shattered, came during a clandestine visit to a vast industrial complex in the northwest of England, ostensibly a civilian factory producing agricultural machinery. What Richter and Brandt discovered, under the guise of inspecting bomb damage, was a colossal munitions plant, a veritable hive of industry humming with round-the-clock activity. The deafening clang of metal on metal, the acrid smell of chemicals and hot oil, and the sheer, oppressive heat emanating from the colossal furnaces were overwhelming, assaulting their senses. Thousands of workers, men and women alike, toiled with a grim, unyielding determination, their faces streaked with sweat, grime, and a quiet resolve. They were producing tanks, artillery pieces, vast quantities of ammunition, and even components for aircraft, not just for their own forces, but for their burgeoning network of allies. The scale of production was mind-boggling, far exceeding anything their intelligence had suggested, dwarfing even some of Germany's own facilities. Brandt, usually so quick to find fault or offer a dismissive comment, could only stare, his mouth agape, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. "This is an entire nation at war, Klaus," he whispered, the words barely audible above the industrial din, a profound sense of awe and dread in his voice. Richter felt a profound sense of disorientation, a sickening lurch as his worldview crumbled. Their propaganda had painted Britain as a nation of effete shopkeepers, its industrial might a shadow of its former self, incapable of sustained effort. Yet here was undeniable visceral evidence of a total war economy, mobilized with a ferocity and efficiency that rivaled, perhaps even surpassed, their own. They witnessed women, many of them young, operating heavy machinery with astonishing skill and precision, their hair tied back in scarves, their movements efficient and purposeful. They saw elderly men, too old for the front, working alongside them, their hands gnarled but steady. This was not the weak, decadent society they had been told about, a nation on the brink of collapse. This was a nation united, its people sacrificing everything for the war effort, their collective will forged in the fires of adversity. The sheer resilience, the quiet defiance in the eyes of these workers, the palpable sense of shared purpose, was a stark contradiction to every single tenet of their indoctrination. Richter tried desperately to rationalize it, to find a flaw, a weakness, a sign of impending failure, but there was none. The organization was impeccable, the output relentless, the morale unwavering. He saw a vast storage yard stretching for acres, filled with newly manufactured tanks, Churchill, Matilda, Valentine, row upon row stretching to the horizon, their grey-green paint still fresh, their formidable guns glinting in the weak winter sun. This was not a nation on the verge of collapse. This was a nation gearing up for a protracted, brutal fight, a fight they were clearly prepared to win. The implications were staggering, a cold, hard truth that struck Richter to his core. Their entire strategic assessment, their belief in a swift, decisive victory, was built on a foundation of sand, a dangerous fantasy. The British spirit, often mocked as mere stubbornness or insular pride, was in fact a deep, inexhaustible well of national resolve, a collective will to resist that transcended class, background, and political affiliation. It was the Blitz spirit they had heard whispers of, now seen in its full, terrifying industrial manifestation. Richter, his mind reeling, attempted to compile a preliminary report detailing the sheer, unexpected scale of British military and industrial mobilization, the undeniable morale of the populace, and the staggering output of their factories. He highlighted the catastrophic discrepancy between their intelligence and the stark, undeniable reality they had witnessed. Brandt, still visibly shaken and uncharacteristically subdued, corroborated his observations with a grim nod. They knew their report would be met with skepticism, perhaps even outright hostility, by their superiors, who were deeply invested in the narrative of British weakness and their own infallibility. Indeed, upon their return to occupied France, their initial findings were dismissed as exaggerated, the result of clever British deception or sentimental overestimation. General Feldmarschall von Rundstedt himself, When presented with Richter's meticulously compiled photographic evidence and statistical analysis, merely scoffed, his face a mask of disdain. "They are merely putting on a show for their American benefactors, Oberleutnant, a facade. Their true strength is negligible, their spirit fragile. Do not be swayed by such theatrics." The resistance from their own command structure was immense, an impenetrable wall of ingrained prejudice, self-serving delusion, and a terrifying inability to confront inconvenient truths. Richter argued passionately that to ignore this evidence would be catastrophic, a fatal miscalculation, but his words fell on deaf ears, drowned out by the chorus of denial. The belief in their own superiority was too deeply entrenched, the cost of admitting such a monumental miscalculation too high for men whose careers were built on the premise of German invincibility. The shattering of their illusions was complete, but the tragic implications of their discovery and the stubborn refusal of their superiors to acknowledge it would cast a long, dark shadow over the war to come. The British, far from being broken, were merely beginning to flex their formidable unseen muscles, a strength born of unity and an unyielding will to survive. The profound underestimation of British strength, witnessed firsthand by officers like Richter and Brandt, proved to be a catastrophic strategic blunder for the German High Command, a fatal flaw woven into the very fabric of their war effort. Their stubborn refusal to acknowledge the true scale of British military mobilization, its burgeoning industrial capacity, and the unyielding national resolve of its people led directly to a series of critical miscalculations that would ultimately contribute significantly to their defeat. The initial decision to postpone Operation Celion, the planned invasion of Britain, was indeed based on a flawed assessment of the Royal Air Force's resilience and the Royal Navy's formidable strength. But even after the Battle of Britain, the deeper, more pervasive error was the failure to grasp the sheer depth of British manpower and industrial potential, a blindness that persisted despite mounting evidence. This intellectual arrogance meant vital resources were continually diverted to the Eastern Front, under the dangerous assumption that Britain would eventually wither and fall, or be easily contained by naval blockade and aerial bombardment. The ingrained belief that Britain was a soft target, its people decadent and ripe for collapse, persisted, leading to a prolonged and ultimately futile U-boat campaign against shipping, rather than a more decisive focus on land-based operations or a recognition of the absolute necessity for a truly overwhelming, meticulously planned invasion force. This strategic myopia allowed Britain to breathe, to rebuild, and to prepare. Richter and Brandt, having seen the truth with their own eyes, found their careers stifled, their warnings dismissed as insubordination or weakness. Richter, his meticulously detailed reports consistently dismissed as alarmist and unpatriotic, was eventually transferred to a thankless logistical role on the Eastern Front, far from any strategic decision-making. He survived the brutal war, a haunted man, forever burdened by the knowledge of what could have been avoided had his urgent warnings been heeded. He carried the weight of that unacknowledged truth until his dying day, a silent testament to the cost of denial. Brandt, less intellectual but equally convinced by the undeniable reality he had witnessed, became increasingly disillusioned and withdrawn. His once boisterous confidence and unwavering belief in German invincibility evaporated, replaced by a quiet, bitter cynicism that alienated him from his peers. He died in the brutal frozen fighting around Stalingrad in 1943, a casualty not just of Soviet bullets, but of a war prolonged and made more horrific by the very arrogance and delusion he had once shared. Their fates were microcosms of a larger tragedy, the devastating cost of intellectual arrogance and ideological blindness at the highest levels of command. The broader historical impact of this German miscalculation was immense and utterly decisive. British resilience, often personified by the indomitable Blitz spirit and the unwavering determination of its people, became a cornerstone of Allied victory. The ability to mobilize its entire population for total war, to maintain morale under relentless bombing raids, and to rebuild its armed forces into a formidable fighting machine allowed Britain to stand firm as a crucial, unsinkable aircraft carrier and a vital base for the eventual liberation of Europe. The unwavering spirit of the British people, from the factory floor workers in Birmingham to the soldiers fighting in North Africa and the sailors braving the Atlantic convoys, defied every German expectation. Their capacity for innovation, their steadfastness in the face of overwhelming odds, and their deep-seated commitment to freedom and democracy proved to be an intangible but ultimately decisive weapon. The German High Command, blinded by their own pervasive propaganda and a dangerous sense of racial superiority, simply could not comprehend a nation that would fight on, even when seemingly alone and battered. This profound underestimation of the British character, their industrial might, and their sheer numbers allowed Britain to buy precious time to rebuild its strength, to forge crucial alliances with the United States and the Soviet Union, and ultimately to play a pivotal, indispensable role in turning the tide of the war. The legacy of underestimation served as a stark, brutal lesson for all future military strategists. Arrogance and prejudice blind even the most brilliant military leaders to reality, leading inevitably to catastrophic strategic failures and prolonged, bloody conflicts. The British spirit of resilience, forged in the crucible of war and tragically underestimated by their foes, became a defining factor in the eventual Allied victory, a powerful testament to the enduring strength of a free people united against tyranny. The grey skies over the Channel, once a symbol of isolation and vulnerability in German eyes, became a formidable shield, protecting a nation that would not break, a nation that would ultimately prevail. If this glimpse into the untold stories of World War II captivated you, please hit that like button. Subscribe to our channel for more compelling historical narratives and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps us bring these crucial perspectives to life.